I think the matchup is whether or not Marco will be able to get up Trick Room and execute his strategies. We'll have to see as Game 1 gets kicked off in this finals of the Barcelona special event. Cresselia and Fluttermane, and it's Fluttermane and Landorus for Eduardo.
So, double Fluttermanes, one on either side of the field. I like this offensive pressure coming out from Marco's side. You know that you're likely going to be able to guarantee a Trick Room being set up, but you don't want to be too passive. You want to be able to take advantage of burst availability to yourself and threaten Eduardo's side.
Well, Eduardo's not going to be threatening anything this turn with that Fluttermane. Just switching out into the Amoonguss, maybe seeing that he's not going to be able to knock out the Cresselia this turn. U-turn coming out into that Cresselia, doing a good chunk of damage with that U-turn, and going to be able to pivot out into that Heatran that we've seen Eduardo use to such great success this weekend.
Yeah, this pairing is deadly from Eduardo's side. Shadow Ball just barely missing the 2-hit KO range, but guess what? The special defense drop will allow it, if it is subject to another Shadow Ball, to likely go down. But Trick Room has been set up right now. Not exactly to Eduardo's disadvantage, though.
Not at all, and this is what I really love about what Eduardo's decided to do in this turn. Knowing that he's not likely to be able to knock out the Cresselia, or at least Marco's not going to be able to let him knock out the Cresselia. So Marco getting the Trick Room up, that's what his strategy is going for. Eduardo instead, though, not taking any knockouts, not allowing any momentum for Eduardo's side of the field, and instead getting that Amoonguss in the Trick Room environment. Not going to be able to do anything to that safety goggles on the Cresselia, but is going to be able to act first in this turn.
Oh, let's see if there's going to be any potential read coming out from Eduardo's side because of that Ursaluna switching in. It's sort of a risky play from Marco's side. You may be subject to a Spore if there's any sort of read going into it. However, you do have the potential of having the Flame Orb already activated. Ursaluna is already available for dishing out a lot of damage the following turn.
It is as Amoonguss goes for that Protect, just making sure that it's not going to be taking anything this turn. Terra Blast, though, coming out from the Heatran, is going to be going into that Ursaluna on the switch in. It doesn't end up do enough to pick up the knockout, but that Lunar Blessing finishing off the turn. Cresselia doing what it does best in the Trick Room environment, just helping Ursaluna stay on the field for another turn.
That is a great sort of availability of being able to take into consideration. Likely the slot is going to be targeted into. It's a good play from both trainers, in all honesty, but Marco actually being able to capitalize off of that a bit more. It was a perfect coverage for any potential sleeps going into that slot.
And it would be a sleep going into that slot, but that Lunar Blessing on the Cresselia was so clever from Marco. Would have woken the Ursaluna up, and then it would have got burnt at the end of the turn with that Flame Orb. So just managing that Amoonguss on the field, making sure that Ursaluna was always able to act.
Exactly, so very good position and analysis of this current board state. But we see Eduardo trying to change that up with the Landorus. You want to be able to start the cycling of the Intimidate. We've got Ursaluna, we know it's got Guts boosted Facade. Let's see what sort of damage this does.
Oh, hanging on,
bringing it down to 46 hit points. But let's see if it can hang on from this Grass Terra Blast. It cannot. It is out for the count. However, we know with Marco, we've seen it before, this is maybe a perfect opportunity to get a Torkoal sweep underway.
And it's the Lunar Blessing that finishes off the turn. That's a big impact for the speed ordering of this turn. Eduardo's Heatran can go before that Cresselia. That's a massive change in the way this matchup plays out, where if the Lunar Blessing comes out from that Cresselia first, it probably heals its way out of being able to get knocked out by that grass-type Terra Blast. And so, yeah, Eduardo manages to get the KO on that Ursaluna, remove probably the biggest threat on Marco's team, especially since that Flash Fire on the Heatran is going to be stopping anything coming out from the Torkoal.
Oh, but we're about to see a very cool play. Helping Hand, Sludge Bomb into the Heatran. Wow, that's an Assault Vest Heatran, by the way. That's a lot of damage. Heatwave, not quite enough to pick up the KO, and neither is the double up of the U-turn. Amoonguss just able to survive with a slither of health.
And is Eduardo going to be getting that Landorus out and Amoonguss back into the field? That focus dash on the Amoonguss allowing Marco to get some more offensive training in there, and a really impressive Amoonguss damage there onto that Assault Vest Heatran. Looking like it's in a position where Eduardo's in a great spot, but there is that Flutter Mane in the back for Marco, and if Marco's able to get out of Trick Room, maybe position the Flutter Mane in a position where the Heatran on Eduardo's side of the field is a little bit lower health, maybe he's going to be able to get that little bit of extra damage that he needs off onto that Heatran to knock it out.
Ooh, but here comes the Sludge Bomb. It's actually not going into the Heatran slot, goes into the Amoonguss, maybe anticipating the Pollen Puff support once again coming out, wanting to identify, you need to get rid of that additional support over on Eduardo's side, but the Amoonguss is now out of game one for Marco. The Flutter Mane remains in the back, but perfectly well timed to be able to just come in as Trick Room does expire.
Certainly perfect timing there from Marco. That Flutter Mane's coming in when it matters the most. But with that Amoonguss on the field and the Flutter Mane on Marco's side of the field, carrying that choice specs, Marco's got a big decision to make. Looking at the Pokemon that Eduardo has brought to the match, I'd be seeing a Shadow Ball being the move of choice for Marco, locking into that damage-dealing move that's going to hit pretty much everything that Eduardo has left on the field, but it's not going to be able to protect from that Flash Cannon.
It really will not be. So once again, Eduardo being able to position this Heatran so optimally in this matchup where it's not really being threatened by having the Assault Vest. However, we've got the Helping Hand, Choice Specs, Dazzling Gleam, so no focus of the Moonblast in case there's any redirection.
Oh, the Amoonguss hangs on with just a sliver, 15 HP remaining. The Flash Cannon comes into that Flutter Mane. It's picking up a one-hit knockout, and it's only Cresselia left on Marco's side of the field.
It is indeed. Poor little Cresselia right now, normally being so good at supporting. However, in this current situation, not so on the offensive side. It looks like Eduardo really nailed down the strategy versus Marco in that game one.
Really, really good information going into Game 2. But before we go and talk about Game 2, let's talk a little bit more in detail about Game 1, because really what it came down to, I think in many ways, was that Heatran speed training between the Heatran and the Ursaluna. And it's really unusual to see a Heatran not in a Trick Room focus team, not even in a team that has any Trick Room availability, being slower than a Cresselia there in Trick Room and being able to get that Terra Blast off before the Cresselia was able to act.
I mean, that's a very good call out there, Ben, because normally you would expect minimal speed availability on, let's say, Marco. When it comes to the training, you want to be able to utilize that scenario under Trick Room conditions, be able to train your Pokemon more in the bolt. But Heatran, at least with what it looks like over on Eduardo's side, it seems like it's sort of a deterrent when it comes to Trick Room matchups or certain types, because you want to be able to at least function well under Trick Room, and that mode really seems to be shouting out to be the Heatran and that Amoonguss.
Oh, you called it out in team preview, Costa, that the Heatran is really what holds this team together on Eduardo's side of the field, and he used that to spectacular effect there. And I think if that Cresselia was able to get that Lunar Blessing off in that turn, Marco, I think, expected it to go off in that turn as well, and it would have been a completely different game. The Ursaluna was the main damage-dealing solution that Marco had aside from the Flutter Mane. When you bring Amoonguss and Cresselia to a game, usually they're not the ones to be dealing damage, although that Amoonguss on Marco's side certainly could do some damage. But yeah, it was really that interaction between those two Pokemon. I think Marco's going to have to adjust going into Game 2.
Oh, most definitely. And I feel like, is there any room for Iron Hands to come out over on Marco's side? You're able to have fake out pressure. Maybe if you have a terrestrialization of Heatran, you could try to dish out a tiny bit more damage. You've got the Assault Vest on the Iron Hands, maybe be able to sponge up more damage over on Marco's side. However, yes, we do actually see it come out in the lead. With that Cresselia, you got fake out pressure. You know that you can at least set up Trick Room, but have another option when it comes to your offensive pressure.
Instead of that Amoonguss to have it to work really hard with that Sludge Bomb. Landorus and Flutter Mane coming out from Eduardo, the same as Game 1. And I really like this adaptation for Marco. You called it out perfectly there, Costa, where the Iron Hands is going to be able to do a lot of damage. It has Heavy Slam rather than Volt Switch, so he's going to be able to threaten this Flutter Mane that Eduardo wants to use to his favor. That's also going to do a little bit more of a chunk of damage to the Heatran if it does go for that Grass Terror. Drain Punch would probably be the optimal play there, but certainly if you wanted to call a switch, it's one of those moves that you can certainly rely on.
It really, really can be, as we're going to have the immediate switching right here. This could be a very nice play. It depends, actually, what this Flutter Mane opts to do. Does it try to focus down on that Cresselia or on the Ursaluna? Ursaluna is going to be able to actually get a burn set up for itself. It could go for immediate damage, which is quite nicely what Marco's been looking for.
It's the Shadow Ball coming into that Cresselia, and it's enough to pick up the one-hit knockout.
No.
Cresselia taking the U-turn, Cresselia taking the Shadow Ball there, getting knocked out. No trick room whatsoever for Marco. Eduardo making the read perfectly.
This is so decisive of a turn, as we're going to have the U-turn and Shadow Ball combination enough to pick up the KO on Cresselia. I think we've actually seen very similar plays hosted in Pittsburgh Regionals last weekend. I definitely seen a KO of a similar fashion, but once again, right now, I feel like Marco's in a very awkward position. You no longer have that Trick Room mode set up.
You don't have that Trick Room mode. What you do have is an Ursaluna on the field, as well as an Iron Hands that's going to be able to get a little bit of fake out going on there, and not intimidated by the Landorus, which, you know, probably a little bit of a spoiler alert, is going to be coming in here for the Flutter Mane. You've still got a lot of damage on your side of the field, so I think Marco's definitely not taken the best turn one ever, but has the opportunity to pull it back.
And it's quite tough, because I feel if you were to go for the Cresselia Terrestrialization, it would be near guaranteed to get that Trick Room set up over on Marco's side. Maybe you didn't want to commit just yet. However, Facade, similar to Game 1, doesn't quite pick up the KO on that Landorus at -1 of its attack.
But that Landorus was a Flutter Mane previously, so Marco really making the reads here, taking every advantage of what he needs to do. You have to, after taking a key, or having a key knockout taken against you early in the game, you have to commit to those plays. You have to make the most out of every opportunity that you have, and he's really done that with getting that Facade damage onto the Landorus, because if Intimidate gets removed from play, Marco is going to have a much better time.
Ooh, as the Terrestrialization of the Fairy typing coming out on this Iron Hands. A very, very niche choice of Terra here that we don't commonly see. Stomping Tantrum going into that Ursaluna, not dealing that much damage. Oh! And Heavy Slam, not quite enough to pick up the KO. Facade focuses on the Amoonguss, does have to actually take a bit of recoil damage through from that Rocky Helmet and a Spore into the Iron Hands.
Amoonguss doing what Amoonguss does best in this position, and yeah, getting that sleep onto the Iron Hands. That's going to be big for Marco's damage output. We don't know what Marco yet has in the back to support that Iron Hands and Ursaluna, but at the moment it's looking like the Ursaluna is going to have to pull a lot of weight in this position.
It really, really has to, whilst avoiding all types of damage. Stomping Tantrum, once again, not quite enough, but the following attack will likely be so. We're going to see the Iron Hands going ahead and, of course, still being asleep. Facade does pick up the KO, but at the cost of the Rocky Helmet recoil. Very tough scenario, likely to actually go down now due to the burn.
And due to that Rocky Helmet chip as well. Yeah, really kind of a even trade there, I think, overall. You look at the Ursaluna, it's got the Facade on the Landorus on the switch, it's got the knockout onto the Amoonguss on Eduardo's side of the field, and that's a big part of the damage dealing here. I was expecting the Flutter Mane actually in the back for Marco, but now the Amoonguss is coming in, Heatran coming in from Eduardo, and you see how much of an issue that Cresselia was going down in turn 1. Marco made a read, didn't have to terrestrialize on turn 1, and that really, he really got punished for that, bringing only slower Pokemon to the match.
And it sort of puts Iron Hands Fairy typing of the terrestrial mechanic in an awkward position, because sure, you get to lose the weakness to ground types, but you're allowing Heatran to actually get off its same type attack bonus of a steel typing into the Iron Hand. So a bit of a precarious situation for Marco, no doubt about it. However, Stomping Tantrum is going to focus down on the Amoonguss in combination with the Flash Cannon. Not quite enough to pick up the KO. The real question is, could the Iron Hands wake up? And it could not.
Not this turn, maybe a little bit later on. Sludge Bomb going into the Landorus is enough to pick up the knockout critical hit, definitely not making an impact in this turn whatsoever. And I love the way that Eduardo is playing this end game, going for the Flash Cannon and not going for the Heat Wave. Heat Wave does have an opportunity to miss, and that Iron Hands is going to be threatened heavily by this Choice Specs Flutter Mane that has come in to greet the field.
And you want to put yourself, if you're Eduardo, put the situation on the Amoonguss where it gets knocked out from the immediate follow-up of a Flutter Mane to allow the Iron Hands to be on its lonesome self right now, hoping to wake up, hoping to not take a lot of damage, and this is going to be tough. It does wake up, however, it's not going to be able to do as much as...
Heavy slam into the Flutter Mane, and it's surviving on just 2 hit points. This Iron Hands has not managed to make it through, and it will be Eduardo Cunha who will be the Barcelona Special Event Champion in 2024.